Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Center's Speaker Series on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. This is our third speaker series with speaker Allison Linney. I'm Carolyn. I'll be your Zoom host tonight. Everybody will be muted for the presentation. And if you have any questions or comments, you can put them in the chat at any time. And when Allison has finished her presentation, I'll read out the questions and comments to her as best I can. We thank the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for their hard work in putting together this third speaker series. In particular, special thanks to Center member Enid Krieger, who created the series and procured all of the speakers. Thanks to all the speakers for generously giving of their time and expertise. We're grateful to them, to our committee members, to our volunteers, to our center members and our community, all who make the center the wonderful place that it really is. Special thanks to our philanthropic friends who make it possible for us to provide opportunities for healthy aging and lifelong learning. If you're new to the center, you can check out our website, and I put that link in the chat, and you can sign up for our weekly e-newsletter to discover other programming we have available. Let's see, I think that's it for me. I will now turn this over to our director, Peter Thompson.
Thank you, Carolyn, for leading us and managing this Zoom. I know it's a big job, and I appreciate all the good work you do. I want to add my thanks to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee made up of center members and staff and board members that do a lot of different work over the years, including this speaker series. And thank you all for joining us. It's not worthwhile unless people come to the party, so thank you very much for being here. Carolyn noted, the center is a community center focusing on healthy aging. We're open to all, but we focus on people age 50 and better. For those who aren't familiar with us, we're kind of a teen center for older adults, a place where people have access to the key ingredients for living well and aging well. And we hope that you enjoy this series and learn more about us in the ways that Carolyn mentioned. As a 501c3 nonprofit owned by the community, our job is to serve the community. And we do that in a lot of ways, such as lifelong learning. We provide information for people so they can make informed decisions about their lives and how they can be active and vibrant members of the Greater Charlottesville Albemarle community. Many of you have tuned in to earlier sessions of this series as well as last fall. And I do want a quick update. Also, we have served on, created a racial equity task force that completed its work and submitted a final report that our board of directors accepted and approved the key proposals this week to create a new standing special board committee made up of board members, staff, and community members to take the recommendations of the task force and put it into an action plan that will be created this summer. So you'll be learning more about that. We will be focusing very much internally first, as any good organization does, make sure we have our own ducks in a row. And over time, when we feel like we have a better standing in that, we will also take a role in fighting systemic racism in the Greater Charlottesville area, because as a community resource, we believe that is our moral obligation. I want to also thank all the speakers, particularly my good and longstanding friend, Allison Linney, who's joining us tonight, and all the volunteers who organized this work. The speakers are pro bono, volunteers are volunteers. But you may imagine that it takes a lot of foundational work and staffing to make all this happen as well. And I want to add my thanks to anybody who is already part of our philanthropic family. 60% of the revenue that operates the center on a day-to-day basis to create our world-class programs comes from individuals like you and me who make private philanthropic gifts. If you're already a donor, thank you very much. If you are not and you are interested in supporting these types of programs for the betterment of our community, encourage you to visit thecentercville.org/donate, and you can join our philanthropic family as well. That's what keeps the center going and has for over 61 years. Thank you again for joining us, and I'm pleased to turn it over to my dear friend Enid Krieger to make some additional remarks and introduce our speaker. Thank you again for coming.
Thanks, Peter. Hi, everybody. Again, I'm really happy to see all of you. I get really excited when I see all of you in this room, and I'm trying to think of it as a room. I hope that you'll all agree that so far it's been an interesting journey with this series, and I hope it's helping us to understand each other just a little bit better, and I hope it's helping you understand yourselves just a little bit better. Our speaker this evening, Allison Linney, is my friend. We have lots of things that we share together. We share visits, meals, thoughts, giggles, church, family, lots of things that bring us a lot of joy and a lot of fun. And one of the reasons I asked her to take on this challenging topic, and I do take responsibility for the title, is because Allison takes friendship to the next level, beyond the one-on-one. She seeks out opportunities to be an ally of Black people. As you listen to her presentation, I know you'll be thinking about how many Black friends you might have, or if you're Black, how many white friends you might have. And it wouldn't be surprising at all, so don't feel guilty if your answer is none. Because remember, we live in a very, very segregated society for a very long time. And it may not even occur to you to reach out to that classmate or coworker or board member as a friend because you don't share a common experience. But as Kaki said last week, we are all human, and humans are better together. So we're enjoying a very human experience together during this series. Allison Linney is the founder and president of Allison Partners. It's a consulting firm here in Charlottesville, which offers training, professional coaching, and organizational development services to a variety of diverse nonprofit and for-profit organizations. She received her MBA from the Darden School of Business at the University of Virginia, and she's currently the chair of the board of UVA's School of Continuing and Professional Studies. Allison is a person for whom the slang term woke can be applied because she's intentional in her efforts to not allow white privilege to perpetuate Black oppression. And she makes justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion a part of everything that she does. And that's why I love her, and that's why she's my friend. Welcome, Allison.
Okay, well, I'm glad this was recorded so I can go back and listen to that. That felt good. So thank you, Enid. And of all the things that matter in our friendship, I think Enid, and especially a lot of people, even on this call, may know I sometimes think of Enid as my right and Marie as my left, Marie Baker. So a shout out to Marie. The three of us have a lot of fun. But the main thing we do is laugh. Okay, so the main thing we do, I was saying that I often think of Marie and Enid as my right and my left. And of all the things that matter in our friendship, it's the fun that we have. It's the laughter, it's the silliness. But I think it's also the safety, the thinking about how if anything bad happens sometimes between us, if we stumble, which we do, that we can talk about it safely and give each other feedback and not have that be a high-risk territory for us. So let me back up and talk about how I think I came into this work. And it always starts for me. Well, it starts for me in my parents' house, where I grew up in a church that was really mindful about social justice. But most importantly, it starts in my mother's bookshelf. So before I was an MBA at Darden, I was an English major at UVA. And as a child, books were just, I think there's very little my mother wanted me to be more than a reader. And she left her books everywhere. There was no book that was off limits to me. That includes, Mom knows where this is going. She's on the call, by the way, so is Daddy. That includes romance novels and everything in between. And if I could read it, I had access to it. And so in my childhood, my first Black friends were the people in stories. Before I was exposed to that many Black folks through school or other things, because I remember having friends that were different than me, but not a lot. And what made me want it so badly was the books that I read. And so the very first book that really mattered to me in this space when I was a teenager was the Autobiography of Malcolm X. I found this on my mom's bookshelf, and also The Bluest Eye. And Mama, if you're wondering where your book is, I have it. And it was $3.95 at the University of South Florida, has my mother's name in it. And I found these two books. And when it was over, my first thought was, oh my God, Alex Haley is dead. Malcolm X is dead. I will not know these people. Now, to know me is to know that's a little kind of a white girl obnoxiousness. I of course assumed that Malcolm would, want to know me and go out to dinner and do things like this. So there's a little bit of teenage arrogance in there. But I fell in love with these characters, these people who taught me things about experiences I did not have. And that is when I first began asking questions like, why does everyone in school tell me about Martin and not Malcolm? Why? Why is that the way it is? So that was my first exposure, really, to people that I could know and be friends with before anyone was going to be friends with me, if that makes sense. And so in my mind, I was friends with Toni Morrison's characters and Zora Neale Hurston and Maya Angelou. As I found these books, I would pretend that these would be people who would want to know me and want to eat with me. And I had a hope in my heart that one day I would meet people that were this brave, this courageous, this willing to fight for everything, and that maybe they would want to be my friend. So I share that with you because when it comes to how to make friends of any type, but especially how to make Black friends, one of the special things we can do is get to know Black stories through stories that are already written, that are as old as time, and that we cannot put the pressure on the Black folks in our life to teach us some things, because many of those lessons are available to us in fiction. And so that's sort of how it started for me in childhood. But then I would say I came to the University of Virginia, and I came what I describe as a very well-intentioned white girl, not Black, a well-intentioned white girl who wanted to do good things. And already I was falling into some language of centering myself as the white woman in that story and wanting to help, which can oftentimes come across as patronizing and condescending when especially a young white woman has a well-intentioned hope in her heart. But I was very blessed that right away I met a woman named Dr. Greer Dawson Wilson. And many people who've been with me in these things know that no story is complete for me without her. She was the director of Newcomb Hall, the student activities building at the University of Virginia. And I saw her speak. She was Black, African American. And she started talking about things like white privilege back in 1992. When those words weren't that common. She introduced me to a work by Peggy McIntosh, who was some of the original thinking on what it meant to have white privilege back in the early 90s. And I wanted to be her friend so badly, and I irritated her to no end in the hope of being her friend. But I sat around and I waited and I looked for ways to volunteer. And I would clean out her office and offer to do anything that I could be around her. And so she passed away 17 years ago this November, but I really enjoyed an arc of being her student, her colleague, her friend, her mentee. We knew so many of those things. And the reason I bring all this up is because it's important for me to share with you that part of how I ended up how my life is now with friends. First of all, I just love having friends. So that's just really important to me. My father, my daddy, Dr. George Linney will sing, friends are so important, you are my friend. And that song is important to me in terms of, so I have bandwidth and desire for more friends of all walks of life. But Greer very intentionally taught me, and I'm sure there's some people who might argue the merits of this, that if I did not actively seek out having Black people in my life to be my friends, that I wouldn't have any. And that my life would reset to my white, upper middle class wealth and the way that my life had been up until that point. And so Greer would ask me how many Black friends I'd made that semester. Which I'm sure out of context may seem strange to people, but it was incredibly important to her that I put myself in places where I was likely to be as exposed to as many Black people as possible, to learn from them, to learn about what mattered to them. And Greer was this way around all dimensions of diversity. The summer of my second year in college, Greer asked me at the end of the summer to let her know what my sexual orientation was. This was 1992, 1993. I was like, what? I don't understand the question. And she was like, well, I'm sure you'll read a book or talk to a person. And I said, and she said, did I ask to know now? No, thank you. You need to sit with this question for 3 months. And at the end, you can let me know. And what a privilege, what a blessing to have someone actually, and I did, I explored that, I thought about it. I didn't know how you did that, but I did what I always did. I read, I talked to people. And her point was, I believed that I was a cisgendered, we didn't have that word as much back in the 90s, but that I was heterosexual, a woman, and that I loved men, that I wanted men for boyfriends. But the fact that that was something I'd never thought about before, that was all because of Greer. So I tell you all this just so that you know, she pushed me on every dimension constantly and asked me to constantly think about whether or not I had read enough books, been to enough presentations, and been where Black people would be, that I might, and Greer, I know some of you know her on the call, Greer would have also said, because you can be irritating and not all of them are going to want to be your friend. So you're going to have enough around that like a few agree to this. And that was the beginning of feedback. And anyone who loves me knows that it's an acquired taste and it can be a little irritating sometimes. And that feedback, that was the beginning of learning how to take feedback from Black people with no questions asked. Oh, am I sometimes irritating? Am I sometimes patronizing and condescending? Thanks for telling me. And I've always been pretty brave about getting feedback, but I just wanted Greer to keep me. I never wanted to not be hers. And so one of the prices of that was that feedback was part of it. And I was going to have to be on this constant discovery to understand racism and my privilege. So I share all that to let you know how I came to the work, and how making friends that were different than me was just incredibly important to me. And I've given a presentation like this before where people would say to me, are you saying like that's like quotas or like a certain number? And I was like, I don't know. I just know Greer always wanted me to have more. And so more was important to me. And more starting in the 90s means that, and I'm a good friend. I've learned how to be a good friend. More means that I probably have a lot. And that's probably how I got to this point and why Enid would ask me to do this. So with that being said, when Enid asked me to do this and pick the title, I started really thinking hard about what would I say about how to help people know whether or not they have Black friends or just know Black people. And so this is where I'm going to be as brave as I know how to be. And then there's going to be plenty of time in the Q&A for you to push me on some of these things if you'd like to. So if I'm very, very brave, what I will tell you is I talked to a lot of the Black folks in my life. And one of the things I checked with them is that the truth is right at the moment, many of the Black people I know are so exhausted, so tired from everything that has happened, from constantly needing to explain things and defend stuff and help often white people on their journey, that I don't actually know that many Black people looking for a new white friend. And again, that sentence comes out of my mouth and I think, who am I to say that, right? Like I by no means do I claim to speak for all Black people. I can only speak about the ones who joined me in my work on this and who I asked them, what might it be helpful if I say? So some of these key things that we do that makes us so tiring sometimes, and I am talking to my fellow white folks here, is we can really be exhausting. And so I made a list and I ran that list by a lot of folks, a lot of Black folks in my life. And so that's how I've kind of curated this list. So I'm going to talk to you about what we do that can be tiring and make it hard to be friends. And then I'm going to turn it into an affirmative sort of appreciative thing and help you think about how to make friends of any stripe. So we rush intimacy and we demand authenticity and trust. We make being friends with us often that you have to trust me. And you've got to make sure that I get to know that I'm one of the good white people, that as a Black person that I'm on my journey. I'm an ally, and like, please put me in the good box so that I don't have to worry about getting into trouble. Even when we're learning about all these things around privilege, we often will debate it, need to have an argument about it. And we struggle sometimes to understand that actually our impact of the actions that we take and the impact of our actions is more important than what we intended. That it doesn't actually matter if I meant to do harm. If I did harm and someone brought it to my attention is the only thing that matters. We often ask the Black folks in our life to explain things. We don't like feedback. And again, I'm generalizing here, but just so you know, these are all traps I can fall into as well. I was talking to one of my dearest friends and mentors and sharing about how, you know, for those of you who are friends with me on Facebook, there's a lot of Black children who come and stay with me in the summer, and they go to camps and we have fun. And so I would say there's several families that trust me to take care of their children for a week, and I'm so honored by that. But even then, I would say they trust me, sorta, as much as you can trust a white person. And I've had a lot of white people get pretty angry with me when I say that. But again, Enid brought me here to tell my truth. So I don't expect anyone to trust me, but I especially understand if a Black person doesn't. I can walk away from this work anytime I want and be safe. And I might struggle with the lack of safety of being a woman, but for the most part, my experience shopping and banking and buying a home and doing things like that, if I want to stop talking about these topics and not attend these events and not post the things I post on Facebook or write about the things I write about, I can walk away from it. And therefore, I just don't ever expect to be trusted. I hope to be, but I also know that I may do a thing that's very untrustworthy, even when I didn't mean to, but it won't matter that I didn't mean to if I did an untrustworthy thing. And I think that is why some of the Black people who love me feel a little safer with me, maybe. I can't, again, it's daunting work to speak for other people, but that's what I'm trying to do. So I'll just keep trying to do it. I get feedback all the time. I make mistakes. I know all of Charlottesville has been talking about the Virginia Book Festival, and Dr. Tiffany Jana did a presentation with Khaki. So Khaki, who was our speaker last week, she and Tiffany did a program together talking about Tiffany's books, and it's one of the most important to me, The Subtle Acts of Exclusion. And I know I've got people on this Zoom who value this book as much as I do. And as you know, when Tiffany and I talked through these things, I mean, just a couple months ago, I did something where I thought, oh gosh, I got to call Tiffany and tell them about this stumble that I made when I mispronoun them, and I've got to talk it through, and I've got to get better at that. It's unacceptable. And one of the things that Tiffany talks about, and they mentioned it in our in her book festival talk, was this idea that they step in diversity dung all the time. They are one of the most powerful speakers on this topic. When August 2017 happened in Charlottesville, the first thing I did when people asked me what should I do was this first book, this sort of primer that I think of that Tiffany uses called Overcoming Bias. By the way, I'm going to have a blog post that has all these books in it for you. So if you don't capture all of them, and also remember this is being recorded. But step one for me was say to people, okay, read this. This is the first step. And I remember when Tiffany asked a lot of us for input on this title, this book title. I mean, it's probably one of the most important naming exercises I can remember being a part of, because it was so important to Tiffany to think about how to perhaps microaggressions wasn't really serving us as well as it could in the space. All that being said, Tiffany talks about how they step in diversity dung all the time. So there is no not messing up. There's a double negative in there as an English major, but we mess up all the time. If we're going to be human with each other, if we're going to try to be ourselves, to take risks, we will just stumble all over the place and do hurtful things. The question is, what do we do when it's brought to our attention? So back to my list around the things we do that's hard is we just don't take feedback. We don't just say, thank you. Oh, thank you for telling me. apologize and let it be done. And we center ourselves and our feelings in the narrative. I gave a talk a couple years ago where one of the things I said to people was, cry at home. Your tears are taxing so many of the Black folks that are doing the work, the emotion that you have about this, the horror that you feel, all of which is good, but all of that, it puts a tax on things, and it brings it back over to how you're feeling and what you're experiencing. I mean, after August 2017 in Charlottesville, the number of meetings I've been a part of for a long time where white folks would show up and then talk about their experience and how they were processing August 2017, it was so hard to watch, because all of a sudden we were now processing everything through their lens of the pain they felt of having learned about all these years of oppression. So I mean, look, talk about centering yourself. I'm the center of this talk. I'm fearful that I will center myself inappropriately. So it's dicey work, but I keep trying to be brave enough to do it. I think Kathy said, I can't remember if it was Kathy that said it, but we get weird, squirmy, and defensive when racist issues come up, rather than being like, ooh, wow, did I miss something? I'm glad you told me. We talk about being colorblind, which is just so hurtful. And I want to see all the difference and love it all. We talk about wanting melting pots, we talk about wanting to say all lives matter, rather than realizing the reason we say Black lives matter is because until they do matter the same way, not all lives can matter. So those are sometimes I'm not saying that's the all-inclusive list, but that's a lot of the stuff that a lot of the Black people in my life are talking to me about, and that I thought I would share with you. And so now let me kind of flip it a little bit to, how do you go about the business of making friends across difference? First is to think about how you make friends in general. Look for things that you do in common, but also if the things you like doing tend to have you in rooms that are fairly heterogeneous, then pick some new activities. Go to places. This is where Greer really encouraged me. Go and be in places where not everyone looks like you, so you'll have those experiences and learn to like something new. Do things together. I love breaking bread with people and having coffee, invite people to meals, invite people to events. Now, I'm fortunate. I own a company in town, Allison Partners. We sponsor a lot of stuff. So I have a lot of tickets to things, and I like to bring people. And I ask myself if I look back over a quarter, 3 months or 6 months, and ask myself, have I brought a diversity of people to the events that matter to me? So, and continue to do all of that reading. I brought up Malcolm. So, this book, if you haven't read the Autobiography of Malcolm X, it's an incredibly powerful one. From it, I then moved to this huge book about Malcolm X's life. So this is a really powerful one for getting into what the government suppressed about knowing Malcolm and understanding his journey. And then just this week at the book festival, by the way, I love young adult authors. One of my favorite books is The Hate U Give, made into a movie. But I learned about this new author, Robin Farmer, that's based on more about Malcolm and me. And then One Night in Miami, if you haven't seen that movie yet, on Prime. It's about a story of Malcolm and other famous Black men getting together. And when I saw that movie, I saved it. And I saw it and I thought, oh, we're back together. I haven't seen Malcolm in so long. I've missed him. I share all that to say, again, I have a very active imagination and a lot of curiosity. So I really hope it's working and not coming across as strange. But those are ways that I felt connectedness before I could have connectedness, and cared and maybe had empathy. That's really where I'm always trying to build my empathy for different experiences. Maybe I had that before someone else, a person who was alive, or a person who was actually available to me as a day-to-day friend, before that person was there to tell me stories and do things. So continue to do that. Learn as much as you can. I was an English major, but I also took every single thing at UVA that I could on African-American writers. The Harlem Renaissance with Dr. Deborah McDowell was one of the most important classes in my life. And I mean, I met her and oh boy, I was not a good enough student to impress her, but I did never work so hard for a B+ in my life. And in my hopes and dreams, I wanted Deborah to be my friend very badly. But I knew that wasn't an appropriate thing to say out loud in my 3rd year at UVA. I don't even think I was 21 yet. But for years to come, I would go to everything that Deborah did. Every time she spoke, every time she published, anytime I could be around her, and I would just show up. And eventually, 10 years later, I think Deborah noticed I was kind of stalking her in the weird way that I can, but I'm honest about it. And then I remember there was a time where I then asked her if we could go to dinner. But I didn't rush that. That's something that took 10 or 15 years before I thought it would be appropriate to ask if we could have dinner. And so go slow on some of these things as part of my advice. Be yourself, be authentic, but also try to be the self you want to be. Another amazing Black woman who's taught me things is Dr. Melissa Thomas Hunt. She was a professor at Darden, is now the head of global diversity and belonging for Airbnb. And this book she introduced me to, I have found to be incredibly helpful. It's called How Good People Fight Bias, The Person You Mean to Be. Okay. And I'm going to include all these resources for you, but it's a book about how do I actually become what I want, the intent of who I dream of being and how I want to behave, that I might be worthy of allyship. So be yourself, but also recognize that sometimes yourself is kind of creepy and a little irritating and sometimes hurtful. And therefore you will need to make it safe and easy for people to give you feedback so that we can keep going through those difficult, squirmy moments. This one's really important to me. Believe Black people the first time. When they tell you something, when they ask you, when they share a truth with you, it is not up for debate. It is meant to be the gift that it was. I mean, if you were told, especially if you were given feedback, you were deemed worthy that you might actually do something with it. So accept it as the gift that it is, and try really hard not to process it through your pain or your newfound understanding of what they must be going through, but thank them for telling you and really let it land. And that's true for all humans, but especially right now, in all times, but especially these times, the exhaustion of being Black at work, at home, everywhere right now, and the risk that goes into telling a story and knowing that someone may put a lot of energy into telling you why they didn't mean to be racist. It's a lot. So become one of the people for whom that's not risky. And that doesn't mean that you can't have discussions or talk about what you intended, but really notice your tendency to defend yourself. Okay, let's see. So try not to rush the relationship. And don't demand all of that authenticity, vulnerability, and trust right away. Several of the Black folks that I talked to as I was getting ready for this reminded me that after George Floyd's death, that I didn't necessarily call right away, that I left a call or a text and just said, I can't imagine how exhausted you must be. Know that I'm holding you in my thoughts. You don't need to call me back. You don't need to talk to me about it. I don't need to process this with you, but I need you to know that I am hurting about this and I'm going to get busy figuring out what I can do about it. And I'm here, but no need to call me back. And so I think not rushing things is important. Be generous, invite people into your home, out for meals, but especially into your home. Really ask yourself, if you know a Black person, have you invited them? Now, they may not want to come, in which case that's okay too, but ask yourself if you actively look to open up your space to new and different people, or do you tend to just have your family and closest colleagues around? Actively think about how to make it easy to be friends with you. Anyone who knows me knows that my brother's children are the light of my life. They blog for me. And the youngest, who's now 13, I don't know how that happened, William, he has a whole trail in my blogs called What William Knows. And William's one of those kids that's just like connected to the great divine. He knows things. And so he and I, every year or so, we make a list of wisdom that he has for the people, for adults. And one time, I mean, he was like 8 years old, and we were talking about advice he had for grownups on how to live. And he said, you know, I'm learning a lot about civil rights in school. And I think if you want to make a new friend, you should go up to him and say, what's your name? Then tell him your name, and then say, do you want to play? And you should always play what they want to play, not what you want to play. You should always look to do what is interesting to them rather than turning it back to your play. And then he told me, and then we're just sitting there and he goes, now, you know, sometimes Allie, that's what the kids call me. He goes, Allie, you might also want to make a friend with a kid who has a different color skin than you. And I'm like, yeah, I want to do that. What do I do? And he was like, and remember, I hadn't asked him, like, how do you do this? He was like, well, it's just really important to remember they might be having a very different experience than you are. And I was like, okay. And he said, but on the inside, they're a lot the same as you are. And so I just recommend, and he talks this way, I recommend that you play with them as much as you can and ask them what they want to play. Just even if you don't like the game, do the game that someone else wants to do. That's a nice way to make a friend, any kind of friend. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna write that down. So here I am, 5 or 6 years later, telling you that William says, remember, they may have a different experience, but on the inside, they want a lot of the same things you do. Actively name privilege. One of the privileges of being on this call, this whole thing, is that, you know, Kaki is a friend of mine. I so admire Dr. Shalene's work. Susan Bro and I have become friends over the years. And I will never forget when I first was exposed to Susan. I sat next to her. I didn't know who she was. It was like September something of 2017. So for those of you who don't know, Susan was our first speaker in this presentation. And her daughter was murdered here in Charlottesville in August 2017, that terrible weekend for us. And we were at the NAACP banquet. So that's one of the things I recommend. Go places, donate to the NAACP, attend events, make yourself known and be known for making sure these things matter. And I was sitting next to Susan. I just did not register who she was. So we were giggling and talking about dresses and sparkly things and the kind of, you know, way that, I mean, I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm fun to have at your table at an event, right? I mean, because I'll make sure we all get to know each other. And so we're doing all this, and then they call the thing to order. And y'all, they call her up to speak. And I think, oh my gosh, that was Susan Bro, and her best friend was sitting next to her and goes, don't worry, you're the first person who's talked to her like a regular person in a month. So like, just don't worry. And I was like, did I say something? Oh God. I mean, I just, you know, that feeling where you think, and especially if you're someone like me who can really suffer from foot and mouth disease, I'm like thinking, oh dear. And I think that's how we became friends, it was over silliness and ridiculousness and pretty sparkly dresses. But here's the important part of the story. Here it is, this just horrific thing she's been through. Susan gets up to the podium and she starts to talk and says, thank you for having me. I'm just learning how to do these events. But what I want to tell you is I'm just so sorry. I'm so terribly, terribly sorry that it takes my white daughter getting murdered to make people have these conversations. I know that your children have been murdered for hundreds of thousands of years and no one's paid attention. Here is this woman they brought up to talk about her daughter who'd been killed not 4 weeks before. And the most important thing to Susan was talking about the fact that she knew there were hundreds of Black people in the room whose family members have had terrible things done to them, and no one's asked them to speak at a podium. And it was just this moment of the pin dropped and people stood up and just clapped and wept. And again, right now, Susan may be listening and would be saying I might be centering her in the narrative. And you may remember Susan shared with us in her talk that pretty quickly she was given feedback on how it was becoming about her and not the movement. But I bring up this story so that you know that every time I've ever been with Susan, she is worrying about whether or not this Black person is being treated well. She is worrying about whether or not we're dealing with mass incarceration and voter rights and the things that so often matter. and always able to name her privilege. And that's powerful. You may not get to stand up at a podium and do it, but wherever you can name it and not have anxiety about naming it, that's a powerful thing you can do to make friends with anybody, but especially as you think about how to have a more diverse friend group. So feedback is a gift. I get it all the time. I stumble, and I just try to make it safe and easy to talk to me. Be really thoughtful about language. I talked to a dear friend of mine this weekend who played basketball for UVA, and he was talking to me about how in Europe, people talk a lot about tolerating him. He's a big Black man. And he was like, I don't want to be tolerated. I mean, have y'all looked up the definition of tolerance? I don't want to be tolerated. And so think carefully about, and tolerance, it has a history that's powerful to some people, but think about how those words may be taken by other folks. We don't want to tolerate one another. Fight for things that matter. I'm getting close to the end of my list here, and we're going to open up some dialogue. When the Chamber of Commerce here in Charlottesville wanted to form a minority business alliance, I can't tell you what it meant to me that they asked me to be a part of that, to try to connect and be a part of making that happen. And so that matters to me. If I can make some extra money in my business, I have to take care of myself and my employees, but I try to give away as much as I can for the causes that I think will be helpful. Think hard about safety from police. Understand that more likely than not, your white children that you know or love are affiliated with are going to have a safer time. After Dr. Jelaine, I think I've got that right. I know it's Dr. Smith. After she spoke 2 weeks ago, I asked her for advice that she had for my topic. And one of the things that she said was, if you can feel safe doing it, if you see police officers pulling people over, get out and watch. Make sure that things stay safe. Use your privilege to keep people safe. If that feels too risky for you, if you can't do that, you can really think hard about voting rights. If nothing else, if our talks up until this point have not taught you, things are the way they are by design, by law, by things that have been actively acted in. Already in 2021, more than 250 bills in 43 states have been introduced that make it harder to vote. Now, this is a place where people might say, is Allison going political? Is she going to say that I got to be with this party or that party in order to do the right thing? I'm not talking about parties. I'm talking about democracy. I'm talking about the right to vote and to have a say in how things are done. And so those are things you can do. And I list these as things because you can start fighting for these things until someone wants to be your friend, and you will have been in the right place and done the right thing. Find out about why it is so dangerous for Black women when they are pregnant. This is horrifying. It is not possible. Find out why the history of mass incarceration. This is another one of my favorite books, The New Jim Crow. Talks about the history of mass incarceration and how things were designed this way. Actively use your power. If you don't have wealth, you have the power of your time. Think about housing and how actively we have worked in this country to leave Black people out of fair housing. So I could go on, and some of those topics have come up, but if you don't know what to do, any of those things would be real progress to knowing that you were willing to join that fight and not put all the burden of that work on the people who are so hurt by those horrible atrocities. If you can take on that mantle and put some energy into it, then you are lightening the load just a little bit somewhere in your community. I have a good friend who says, don't be a bystander, be an upstander. Know when to stand up and say something. You really do need to read Tiffany's book on subtle acts of exclusion. Notice when you do it and be brave enough to call others out when they do it. And actually, what Tiffany talked about in her talk is calling people in. okay? Letting people come into the conversation and saying, I care enough about you to talk about it. But one of the most powerful things you can do is don't make all that work the work of people of color, the work of other underrepresented groups. Like, you get out, you get in the fight, you learn how to say a thing, you take the risk, and be in there, be an upstander. And sometimes you may have to give up some power. You may have to miss out on some things. It may be somebody else's turn. I coach a lot of physicians, and I was talking to a physician who has been really interested in getting into leadership roles. And one of the most wonderful things I heard him say, we haven't even started work together. And last week he said, one of the things that's clear is for the next round of hires in my organization, it really needs to be Black folks, brown folks, and women. It's just not going to be my turn for a while. It's got to be other people's turn so that we have more representation. And that means I need to take a step back. And I just thought, yeah, thanks for saying that, white man. So really and truly, sometimes you may have to not be the one chosen, not get the thing that you want, but that will mean that more was just and right in where you were, because we know all the good things that come from diversity. So I'm gonna look back at my notes and see if I forgot anything. Learn, learn, learn. I've talked so much about Dr. Jana that I'm gonna put in the chat from the book festival. I tell you, I mean, this COVID, right, folks, it's just terrible. But we have never had so much content videoed that we could all see, even if we missed it. Here it comes, so you can see Tiffany and Khaki speak, and I am just going to be so excited that Dr. Jana is actually on this Zoom right now, my sweet friend, and I have asked them to help me a little bit here and see if they'd add anything, or more importantly, help me if I might have stepped in some diversity dung. So Carolyn, if you would unmute Tiffany, if you can find her. I know there's like 300 names out there.
Just a second, I'm happy to. Tiffany, there you go. All right.
Hello, my sibling.
Hello, Allison.
Ooh, I was nervous.
I know you were. I know you were. And I just have to thank you so much for, one, just for being who you are. And I have to double down and concur that everything that was said about Allison in the introduction, as far as how she does friendship and how she takes it to the next level, is legit. You are the one person who reached out to me after George Floyd in a way that I leveraged as the model to share with other people about how to do it. But thank you so much for this talk today. Thank you for sharing your nephew, your little baby with us, and the wisdom. But no, I don't think that you stepped in any diversity doo-doo. I think that you did what you always do, which is live an honest and authentic life, which is allow yourself to be vulnerable in front of all kinds of people, and share the wisdom and the lessons and the benefit of your experience. What you've experienced with the mentors that you've had and the friendships that you've developed over the years is an extraordinary American experience. If more of us had that, had the opportunities to have authentic friendships across differences, across racial lines, across or sexual orientation lines, and every other thing, we wouldn't be in this mess that we're in today, because we would see that my pain is your pain and your pain is my pain, and that we have to stand up for each other. So thank you for spotlighting my books. I appreciate it. And thank you for everything you said here. I think that you were spot on.
That's good. And I want everyone to know, I don't know for sure that that's going to be the case anytime, just so everyone knows. It's not like I got done with that or ran this speech before Tiffany. So Tiffany, do you have any thoughts about how I talk about very actively this idea that, like, I might look back on 2020 and say I haven't made enough gay friends, that I'm not trying to be token, but I am constantly asking myself. So like, I haven't met the husband yet. Many of us on this call still hope that's coming, right? Do you like how I fit that in there? By the way, my daddy's watching. I know my daddy's going to be like, yes, right, daddy? I can't tell you how fun it is to be able to look at my parents on a Zoom, right? So it didn't work out for me to have the husband and children that I wanted as soon as I did. So I decided my job was to help raise everyone else's. And so I did, I've had times in my life where I've said, I haven't met a child that's recently that has gay parents. I need to actively go do that. Do you have any thoughts on how I actively do that without making it sound like I'm on a hunt for a commodity or something? Because I've gotten that feedback before.
Yeah, I like to say that, none of our beloved demographics are Pokemon cards. You don't got to catch them all. You can't collect us like baseball edition, right? But I'm gonna quote back at you some amazing advice that I heard from this amazing woman named Allison Linney, who told us that the one of the wise choices that we could make is to show up in different places. So if your heart is animated and lit up in a space that says, I would like to show up and be more present for this group of people, then you have to show up where they are. So there's all kinds of wonderful youth LGBT advocate groups that have events, that have things that we can sponsor, that have places that you can go, where you can chaperone, where you can provide safety, where you can even go and speak. And it is in showing up where they are and asking them what they need, where you can build an honest relationship with folks. Because like there's a Facebook group that I found that was like, if you are LGBTQIA and you're a child and your parents have rejected you, like we're volunteer moms, like we'll help you with your prom, we'll help you with the things that your parents just aren't ready to be there for. So the opportunities are out there, but you've got to put yourself in that place. And that is true for building relationships across all kinds of differences. Go where you don't normally go. And if you can find the intersection between what you're genuinely passionate about and the groups of people that you don't know that are doing those things. So if you're a knitter, right, there are all kinds of different demographics of people who love knitting too. So if you can show up at a more diverse knitting convention and find the common ground around the thing that you both really love, it's easier to build a real friendship about something that is substantive other than you are different from me.
Thank you, Tiffany, for being here. It means the world to me. Because I'm like an original fangirl of Tiffany Jana, and I know a lot of other people are. Okay, don't leave though. If I get into trouble, there's still 37 minutes left. Anything could happen. So I think I hit most of the points that mattered to me. And my goal really was to make sure we had plenty of time for questions, especially because I imagine the last 3 speakers left you with questions as well. And I might be able to speak into some of those because I know a lot of those folks in the topic. So I think I'm going to pause. And Carolyn, do you want to read some of the questions in the chat?
Sure. Right now we have some comments, so I'll read those out. You were talking about good movies to watch. Somebody said Betty and Coretta is also a good movie to watch. Another person said, I hesitated to reach out to Black people I know after George Floyd, even though I worried about them, but somehow it felt intrusive to reach out. It was all so ugly. I felt like I was covered with a blank of whiteness. Thank you. I love Dr. Jana's presentation. Thank you, Allison. You're truly a servant leader. Someone posted the acts of exclusion conversation with Tiffany. Thank you, Erica. So any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Here we go. From Cindy, as a shy person, I tend to think that actively pursuing a friendship is intrusive. With Black people, all the more, where I worry about my motives. Am I seeking to number myself upon the justified good white people?
And so step 1 is you are thoughtful about that. And that goes a long way. And I think you go gently with taking a couple of risks. Pick a place that feels authentic to you. So a knitting circle, but finding out if there's a knitting circle that's more indifferent. I think go with caution and recognize that, I mean, so for what it's worth, when I make a new different kind of friend, I don't usually start with my goals around my diversity and inclusion and things like that. I mean, it comes up eventually, usually, because it's such an important part of my life. But being thoughtful about sort of my actions and things I may do that may be hurtful, but which is why, I invite someone for coffee, and if they say no, okay. And I've gotten feedback. I mean, one of my dearest friends in Charlottesville, I wanted very badly to be friends with one of her children. And when I first broached that, she said to me, we're a little worried that you treat children like commodities. And I was like, that's not a bad point. I actually count how many I have in my life. And part of that is because of my own pain of not having my own. Right. So and I was like, whew, thanks for telling me that. Could we keep having dinner? So instead of trying to persuade her that I wouldn't treat her child like a commodity or do something like that, I just said, all right, well, maybe just us should keep hanging out until we find out whether or not I'm trustworthy. And those are the kinds of things that I think matter. I think also inviting people in wherever you can. Like, one of the really important things to me in Charlottesville is the memorial to enslaved labor. When I was at UVA as an undergraduate, I really wanted to talk about the role of African Americans and free Blacks, especially on the construction of UVA. And so I did a little research paper on that so I could do that. And I remember when I went to the tour of the construction site, a guy there named Mike was the superintendent, a Black man. I ran over to him, met him, and was like, hey, do you want to come to the Minority Business Alliance luncheon? And he was just like, yeah, sure. No one's invited me to lunch. And I'm like, really? You're the superintendent of the whole memorial to enslaved labor. I feel like we should all be inviting you to lunch. And he was like, no, I'm in. Now, he might have said no, right? And I was lucky that I had that to offer. But I think if we're authentic and brave in that we would like to meet a new person and introduce them to other people, that it'll be okay. And if not, we're probably no worse off for having tried.
All right, here comes a couple of more questions from Catherine. I have had a close friend of color for many years, and yet we've never had substantive discussions about race. How do I start?
Well, you just did. What you just said there was, I think a very powerful thing would be to say, in everything that's happened in this past year of terrible things, I decided to attend a course at the center about this, and these are some of the topics. And one of the things that occurred to me is we've never talked about these things. And I don't know if that's because you'd rather not, or if because I haven't made it seem like I'd be interested in them. But I want you to know these topics matter to me. And if you ever wanted to talk about them, I'd like to. But it's important to me that you know that I realized we've never talked about this, and I'm not sure why. And again, not all one people are the same. You might have the friend who's like, yeah, no, I really don't want to. I love that we don't talk about it. Okay, then don't force it, right? Then that they enjoy that that's not something that's happening. But the fact that you were brave enough to say so, and that you went to work. I see my good friend, Natalie Moorhead Brown. Hello, Nat. It's from my days back at working at Accenture. And one of the things Natalie said, she teaches in a lot of these areas. When I wrote a blog post about this topic, when people would come to me and say, I think Black Lives Matter, but what do I do? I curated with the help of Dr. Kelly Palmer and Mike Murphy, the 5 books. Remember how Kathy said last week, that 2020 was the year we read, right? So I'm sure y'all are like, please don't give me another book to read, right? I'm so tired. By the way, Kelly Palmer taught me, listen to them. So for every book you've read, listen to it. For every book you've listened to, read it. There's nothing more powerful than listening to How to Be an Anti-Racist in the author's voice. I mean, when I read his book the first time, I was so moved. But then when Kendi read it to me, this past weekend when I was at the lake, I was like, whoo, it's just getting on me in ways that it didn't the first time that I read it. So can't remember where I was going here. This happens, folks. Oh, anybody remember what I was talking about?
Well, how do you start having a conversation with someone? What's the
Right.
question?
So bring these things up, talk about it with people. Oh, I know, right, Natalie. So I wanted, and with help from my friends Kelly and Mike, I wanted to say, okay, if you were only going to read 5, which ones would we read and in what order? So I've just put the blog post that I wrote about that. Black Lives Matter, what should I do next? And we really worked hard on this curated list. And it doesn't mean that all the other books aren't good. And I've mentioned many of them, but it starts with Tiffany's first 2 books, Overcoming Bias and Subtle Acts of Exclusion. And then it goes to So You Want to Talk About Race, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and White Fragility. Those are the 5, plus, as you've picked up from me, all the fiction you can get your hands on, but also deep into an author. So like, as my parents have been doing this work, Daddy came to Mama and said, what should I do? And she said, well, Allie, loves everything Maya Angelou's read. And he said, well, I already read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. But she told him what Greer told me when I said I first loved that book. She said, good, there's 4 more. And a lot of America knows that Maya has 1 book that Dr. Angelou wrote, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, but very few people know there were 4 more that take you through the generational journey that Dr. Angelou went through, that you might know her more deeply. So dive deeper into an author first. So anyway, I put the blog post in there that has, okay, my posts are not going to everyone. My good friend, Erica Vixilio is letting me know that. Good job. You know how the chat can be. See, this is what you do. You invite your friends to the thing, and then they will help you out. And this happens in the time of Zoom.
There you go. It's in there.
Yep.
Thank you.
Another friend of mine from business school, who I also knew in undergraduate, I'm not sure if she's here. When I asked her what she recommended, she said one of the really powerful things was Carol Anderson's work on, she's the Charles Howard Candler Professor and Chair of African American Studies at Emory. And she writes about something called White Rage, how we got so angry and why it's so subtle. And it's all, and so I just put that YouTube video in as I was running around and curating and asking everybody. Oh, but back to Natalie. Natalie is not at all surprised that this took a long time to get there. Okay, so Natalie, I said to her, I said, would this, she and her husband read my blog post on Black Lives Matter. And I said, do you want a new white friend? And she said, if they'd read these 5 books, I'd like to have a new friend. Natalie, I hope that's all right. Give a thumbs up, Nat. Right. So she was like, yes, if I really knew they were committed to that work. So all of you who are thinking, wow, does it really matter that I'm attending these things, going to read these books? Yes, it matters. It makes you a more informed, safe person that might be not so taxing, not so exhausting, because not as much would need to be explained to you. At the same time, once you get done reading, it's time to get busy acting. And I think the most important things we can do is call in the folks in our lives. And Tiffany's Book Festival talk last Monday just does this beautifully. Call in the folks who say a hurtful thing at Thanksgiving. And find a way, prepare. I mean, that's where I really spend my life, is on learning how to help people give feedback. Write out what you want to say, go to them and say, I need to talk with you about something. There's a joke you make every year at Thanksgiving that just turns my skin. I mean, my 3 of my godsons, when I took care of them every year when their parents go on vacation, they know that if we're driving to the movie and somebody calls somebody a fag, we're going to be late to the movie. So I pull over on the side of the road, and like, I'd have a car full of like 8 boys, and they'd be like, oh, and they call me Mama Bling. Mama Bling, we're just kidding. And I'm like, I hate that word. I hate that word. Do you know how many gay people I love who that word has been used to hurt them? Should we call some of them and see how they feel about it? Hang on, let me call the first gay person in my phone, and we'll talk to them about it. And you call them a fag. If you want to call them a fag, you want to use the word fag in my car, you call them. These boys, I love them so much. They are in their 20s now, okay? We had, in the before times, around their mother's table. God knows that's one of the happiest places on earth. and some new kid came to it and made a joke about a fag. And I kid you not, 15 boys went, oh God, here we go. I mean, they were like, oh, you are gonna regret this. Like, it's just, you ask her, she'll do the short version of the speech. Now, you might be thinking, oh, Allison, I don't want to preach at people that way. And I don't always preach. I mean, I preach a lot, but people know that you're not going to get to say a hurtful thing around me. And I did not always know how to talk about that. I wasn't born knowing how to confront somebody. Tiffany talks about in one of her books, how they learned that, when we say someone was gypped, that, that comes from a derogatory term about gypsies. I didn't know that. So like, being able to be brave enough to do all of that, to make everyone a little uncomfortable. And what I always bring it back to is, I'm not trying. I know you don't mean to hurt people. I know you don't mean that. And so you got to get busy. For me, the most important thing is knowing how to confront these things that get said that are hurtful, but still be friends, figure out a way back to forgiveness and friendship. And then also fighting for the things that matter. Black people don't have a choice about it. Okay, they have to fight to survive. They're living every day with the terror that their children will not make it. You be afraid too. You get fearful and scared for young Black men. You be as afraid as I am for the Black godsons in my life, that as they get taller every inch, I think, oh God, please keep them safe. What can I do besides throw my body in front of them, which I would. But you be upset too, even if no one will listen to you being upset about it. You join a committee, you look for voting rights. I'm gonna stop now. I bet people have questions.
There's about 4 more questions,
Yeah,
and
go.
lots of great comments. And thank you, Tiffany, for
Well, you
adding
don't
to
need
that.
to read any of, I mean, unless there's a feedback for me, especially if I stepped in something.
Oh, okay.
Read me those, but.
You want me to read you the questions? Yes?
Read me the questions.
Oh, yeah,
but I don't.
gotcha. Yep.
If my friends think I did a good job, I don't need that.
That's fine. Okay. All right. Can you give any example of the most difficult feedback you received and how you handled it?
Yeah. So because I love to do things with people, I invited some friends and I wrote a blog post about how I took them to a movie. And instead of saying that we went to a movie together, I used what I would call plantation language. I made it about me and my privilege and my money and my generous invitation to say that I did this lovely thing for them. These are people that are very important to me. And I right away, I asked them to read the blog post and they were like, you take us anywhere. I was like, you're right. And these are dear to me, folks, that it just didn't occur to me how that would come across. So, and because I'm so excited about going places with people, so now I'm very careful about saying we did this together, not that I took them anywhere. So, and part of it, was that the hardest feedback? I can be so patronizing sometimes. So that's the thing. In my intention to do right, I am told about the protective language that I use to I step over the line of trying to be a good social justice warrior and all of a sudden fall into the trap of generations of white women who want to save all the Black children and put them under our arms and help move them down the line. And so the line there is, it's a place of real caution. I mean, I already told you one of them. And when I got told somebody that I treat children like commodity, I was like, oh, dang. But all of it for me is always, there's just no answer, but thank you for telling me. It does not matter what I meant. A hard thing for me is, I recently, some of you may have seen it. I love baseball. Daddy, look at that. I got the Braves in. I love baseball. I lost a bet. I made a video with Princess Leia and a lightsaber. I know y'all are like, see, you want to be friends with me. Like, it's fun. There's lightsabers and baseball hats. And the first take of the video I did a lightsaber and an Atlanta Braves tomahawk. Think about it. And it didn't get published, but I woke up in the middle of the night and thought, oh my God, I have just done this terrible thing to Indigenous people. And this is going to be like the person I lost the bet to is showing it to people in Major League Baseball, like the Dodgers are seeing my video. And I was a hair's breadth away from having done a very hurtful thing. And so I woke up in the middle of the night and I texted him, and I'd only shared it with him. I was like, do not show it to anyone. I cannot believe I fell into that trap out of sentimentality for what the Braves mean to me and my father. But there was no reason I needed to do that appropriated thing and use the foam tomahawk that's a part of the Braves. So a lot of times it's the feedback to myself that's the worst. And to think, oh, and I still just the horror for me of if that had gotten out. But folks, I didn't pause. I made that video right here in this room with the degrees behind me. And so it's that kind of stuff, I guess. I mess up all the time. And now I've confessed one that might have been a secret, but now we all 300 of us know, and it's taped for all of time. But showing you how to be brave like that is part of what I'm committed to doing. Carolyn, were there others?
There's one, and it's S. Lisa Herndon. And if I'm not getting this right, Lisa, let me know, okay? When having the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations that start with this is a safe place, to me means let's not make white people in the room feel guilty, but how can I be authentic to my experience?
Hello there, friend. I think part of what we have to do is be willing to say it. And I think I've helped a lot of Black colleagues with this question recently, and especially this year. I think coming up with, if no one in the room steps into that space for you, coming up with words that you could imagine getting out of your mouth in a way that would educate. But I hate to put that pressure on you. I hope there will be people in the room who will do the work. I mean, you and I have been in rooms where this was happening, and I don't even know if I did a good enough job. But I think finding a way to say, you've asked me to think about what's happening and what we can do around diversifying this board or looking at recruiting. And I've just come up with the way to say it. And it sounds like you're asking me to make this safe for you. And what I wish is that I didn't have to worry as much about your safety, that you would be willing to be a bit more worried about the safety of the people who are not here. And this is a hard thing for me to say, but I wanted to share that feedback with you because you've said to me that you really want to do the right thing. I believe that. And so part of what I need to do is we may need to be uncomfortable. I need to ask you to be uncomfortable with me because that's what the work looks like.
And Tiffany, I see that you responded to that. Is that, and
how'd I do, Tiffany? Come on. Come off mute. Can somebody
sorry,
would you add anything? No? Okay, good.
Okay.
But would you ask my dear S. Lisa Herndon how I did? Take her off, please.
S. Lisa Herndon?
Yes, please.
Sure. Hold, please.
Why not? All right. I mean, I beat my time limit. We're on time. So
while I'm trying to find that, any books that you recommend for children or teens, and someone put some books in there. So where's S. Linda Herndon? There she is, Lisa Herndon. Okay.
For teens, everything that's being written about in young adult fiction right now is so powerful. I mean, The Hate You Give is a powerful book. I mean, you can join me. I just got this one because I heard Malcolm and Me, the author from the book festival. I'll find out while I'm waiting for the next question on the book festival site. I mean, I am telling y'all, this book festival this year, they have just knocked it out of the park in terms of rallying and making things happen even in the time of COVID. And now we have all this content for all of time. I mean, the fact that there's something that I can say, here, go see what Dr. Janice said about this with khaki, is just so incredibly powerful. So I will put in the chat, I'm kind of a book festival junkie. And now you know why, because this is where I make friends. People in books will always be friends with me. They never break up, right? They always forgive me in my mind. And we talk about things. And so these are the 16 book festival events I chose to go to. But what's exciting is if you missed them, that's okay. You can go find them on the video, because they post them up immediately, like tonight. So this is thrilling. Enid's, well, it's not just Enid's, but you know how we give it to Enid. African-American Authors Book Club does an incredible event every year. And tonight you can go. It's going to be at 7 o'clock. That's why we're going to wrap this one up a little bit early. You can go and see Yellow Wife with Sadiqa Johnson. And even if you didn't register, they've got it on the Facebook page, and you can go straight to the book festival event, and it'll be up and live. So just never a more thrilling time for content. Now if we could just all get back in a room together, but all in good time. Get registered for your vaccine, please. That's very important.
So as Lisa Herndon,
Yes, how'd I do? You there?
Hi, yeah, Allison, I appreciate you. I respect you highly. And I really posed that question in the chat to cause pause and thought, really,
Okay.
because most often I find myself to be the only one at the table. So it is very disheartening for me to walk in the room as the only one that looks like me. And the first thing when we're having these discussions in groups and boards, very professional rooms that say they want to be about the work, but they also want to feel safe in the space. But to me, it is more important for you to truly hear my experience and to absorb it and not become a distraction or someone I need to coddle on the side and stop the progress of the work. So it is more to say, please be aware and be comfortable enough being uncomfortable to listen to someone's true, authentic experience. It's not about you, believe me. It's not about you. Listen. And if you say you're committed to doing the work, then truly be committed to just listening. I don't need your feedback. Just listen, absorb, and learn, and be willing to do the work. Because I'm not putting guilt on you, but you do come with privilege that I don't come in the door with. So I just want to say that to bring focus. If you're in the rooms where you are saying, you may be the person saying, let's make this a safe place. Be mindful of how that can be interpreted by the person of color in the room. You may say it unintentionally to do harm, but you may be doing harm. That's all I wanted to bring into focus.
It's beautiful. And I mean, this is how I come up with my list of things. I think what I might want to say based on this advice is stop requesting safety. What if you didn't have to be safe? What if you could be unsafe, uncomfortable? We've spent a lifetime making sure white people felt okay about everything. Maybe it's our turn to not be okay, to miss out on something, to not get into this or that school, to not be the person chosen. Maybe that would be okay. And in fact, y'all know about Izomo Oluwo's book that you've probably heard about, So You Want to Talk About Race? Y'all, she's got a second book that will rock your world. It is called Mediocre: The Dangerous Legacy of White Male America. I thought I knew a thing. I didn't know no things until I listened to sort of how Cowboys and Indians was created to make white men feel strong, and how it's not doing good for anybody. And this is one I really recommend you listen to. And I'll tell you another thing Dr. Palmer has taught me, Dr. Kelly Palmer, is you can listen faster than 1.0. You can die if you're thinking I can't get through all this content. The first time she told me to do that, I thought there is no way I can listen to a book on 1.8, folks. And all of a sudden, a book that was 11 hours, I'm taking it in, I'm on the elliptical, and the content is coming. So you can speed it up. And sometimes, especially with Ijoma, who's become again, this is a person I don't know when I'm going to meet, but in my mind, she's mentoring me every day. And I follow her on Instagram, and she tells me a thing every day, 10 times a day, a dumb thing I did. And we don't know each other, but let her voice saturate you. Let her voice tell you a thing and know things that, you know, will take you through how, as much as I admire President Biden, what he did around busing, there needs to be a reckoning around that. How the Proud Boys of Bernie Sanders were, according to this incredible author, are potentially just as hard as white supremacists, because they came after Black women on Twitter and everything else under the cloak of liberalness, and ended up being just as hateful and exclusionary. So the main thing I want to make sure people know is, I mean, you probably don't get asked to do this talk for 250 people if you don't know a thing. And every day I learn a thing I don't know. And it's a continuous journey. And that is really the power of anti-racist work right now, is there's always more to do, and that's okay.
Well, this is great. I appreciate everybody who's written, like, in the chat about books and things, recommendations. So I think I might, when I send this off to everybody with the recording, I'll include the chat so that you don't lose any of these things that we're not sharing right now due to time. But there is one more question. Can I ask it? Okay, from
Sure.
Erica. When you realize you were insufferable and exhausting in the beginning stages of coming to terms with your own racial identity, do you go back to apologize to the people you troubled with your newly found wokeness?
No,
Okay.
no. I do not put it on them. If they're going to stay in relationship with me, there will be opportunities for my new way to be, and I'll be able to show that I have turned over a new leaf. I mean, if I've done a thing that I owe an apology for, Tiffany experienced this recently when I was like, oh, because S. Lisa Herndon asked me to do the Charlottesville Area Association of Realtors, a talk like this, which again, when one of your Black friends calls you to do the work, you think, oh, dear Lord, please let me be worthy of it. And so I did it, and I'm all bragging about Tiffany, calling them she all day long. And that is not Tiffany's pronoun. Tiffany's pronoun is they. But I have nailed it tonight. But that is because I have been practicing it, because it matters to me. And why does it matter to me? Because it matters to Dr. Jana. And therefore, and that's why my pronouns are behind my name, she and her, so that I make it safe for more people to talk about pronouns. And all the time I'm on Zooms that people are like, why you gotta tell me that? And I'm like, oh, let me tell you why I need to tell you that. You're assuming by looking at me that you can tell I'm a woman, or that I identify with that. You don't know that. So I think that's an example of, so let me tell you how I did that apology with Tiffany. I sent her a text and was like, hey, whenever you have time, I need to tell you about a thing I did, and get some advice on how I can do something about it, but no rush. And Tiffany was like on the way to like a family thing that she had been, see, I just did it, that they had been getting excited about. Now you have to understand, before this became Tiffany's pronoun, we called each other sisters. So now, like, so there's some gendered history in our relationship. Anyway, we're doing all this. And I think it was like a month and a half before we could talk. And one of the things Greer taught me was not to urgently need to give that apology, but rather do that apology when it was convenient for Tiffany, not when it was convenient for me. And
Nice.
so that's part of, so if I have a real apology to offer, okay. But if it's sort of just generally that I know I haven't quite been living right, just start living right and people will see it. And then that work will catch up with them. And because of this, one of my godchildren, a couple of months ago, needed to tell me that they were trans. And because of all of this education, I get told this. And I was like, great, what should I make your name in my phone? And they came back, I was like, and pronouns, what's your situation there? I'm still learning about pronouns. And they came back to me and was like, seriously, that's your questions? And I was like, yeah. And they were like, you're not going to ask me if I'm sure? And I was like, nah, I'm pretty sure if you're telling your white auntie that you're trans, you're sure. So like, I don't really, are you sure? Are you okay? Are you? I was like, I'm excited. Like, because I got told. And like, can I ask what number I am? And they were like 7. And I was like, dang, yes, I win. Which is, again, by the way, this is some serious centering of myself. So, but anyone knows me knows I mean well. But anyway, none of that would I have been able to receive had I not had people who had educated me in the power of pronouns all along the way. So on that note, I'm going to stop talking because we need to get to the book festival. For people who are going, I believe there's a survey coming up, and just everyone, thank you so much. I was, I don't get nervous very often, but I was a little nervous about this one, which is why I called many of my people. Look at my accounting professor, Mr. B, in the bottom left-hand corner. Thanks for being here, Mr. B. Mr. Brownlee, for those of you. Oh, and Frank Dukes, who knows I've been stumbling around in the land of this work for 30 some odd years. Oh gosh, thanks everyone for coming. Boy, this was taped forever.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and thank you, Allison. Thank you, Enid.